Throughout our history, one documentary above all others has captured our imagination. There's nothing else quite like this one. You've seen documentaries about dinosaurs, beasts, monsters and cavemen all before, and then there's this. The Last Dragon, or Dragons a Fantasy Made Real, to give it its other name, is a high-class mockumentary. When you say the word mockumentary to someone, they might think of something which is quite cheesy or played for jokes. Or you might think of something like a what-if scenario, played as if it was real. This is exactly that. No other show like this I've seen has ever managed to be so powerful in its storytelling and be so entertaining at the same time. It truly is a marvel. Unfortunately though, it's been largely forgotten about over time. First airing in 2004 on Channel 4 in the UK, and Animal Planet in the US. It's since disappeared into obscurity, though it still does have its fans, hence why I'm here. The story concerns the existence and discovery of dragons within the fossil record by a young paleontologist called Jack Tanner, who analyses a frozen carcass of one, having been obsessed with dragons his whole life, and discovering a T-Rex skeleton with unusual wounds across the skull. The other side of the story gives us insights into various dragon species over time, in a more traditional Walking With style documentary feel. This is in my mind the more interesting part, but I really like how all the science and discoveries tie together to tell a compelling story. Starting in the late Cretaceous, after the fantastic intro, the documentary half of it gradually moves across till after the KPG event, and into the Middle Ages, showcasing 4 separate dragon species as it does so. But it doesn't ever give a reason as to why the dragons evolved in the first place, which feels like a missed opportunity to me. Even so, we do get answers to some of the more obvious questions, like how they breathe fire, how they fly, and how they survive the mass extinction. Each dragon species looks so amazing in its design, particularly the Prehistoric Dragon, which appears first and has such a great patterning on its scales and wings. I really love its design, and luckily we get to see a fair bit of it during the first third of the film. It's such an odd looking thing in its shape, but it looks so good. I also love how there are different CGI models and colours for the Prehistoric Dragon, with the young males having bright red highlights across the body, the females having the same but in a mustard yellow colouring, and finally the mature males with duller markings and looking fittingly mean with their elongated horns. We see this species take in mineral deposits, which supposedly aids in its ability to breathe fire, which is also the reason why the mountain dragons live where they do in the final sequence. There's also the explanation as to how they can fly with their comparatively short wingspan in relation to their bodies, by being able to produce hydrogen to keep them airborne. Also, we get the wing display from the young male to the T-Rex. Those markings remind me of the Torosaurus frills from Walking With Dinosaurs. And finally we get the dogfight, with the males chasing each other over the female. It's such a cool sequence, aided entirely by the music as well, which is really cool. Moving on to the marine dragon, it unfortunately suffers from not getting much screen time at all, and is only really there to serve as a bridging gap between the Prehistoric Dragon and the upcoming Forest Dragon. Despite this, it's still a great design, and looks suited to its environment with its fin-like tail and shortened limbs. You can imagine that there would be other species from this lineage that spawned the myths of sea serpents. It's also the given reason why the dragons as a group survived the mass extinction by taking to the water, and according to the narration, this species was already around before, which begs the notion of it going head to head with something like a mosasaur in the Cretaceous, which would have been an awesome thing to see. The forest dragon looks suitably slender and sneaky, as it represents the types of dragons seen in Asian folklore, which it matches to a T. I always thought it could do with a pair of feelers on its nose as well, but it's fine how it is. Its general body shape is very similar to the marine dragon as well, seeing how it evolved from it. Kinda reminds me of a Komodo dragon in its stance and movement. I like the mimicry ability it possesses as well, and whilst it isn't really something that occurs in reptiles, it's still a cool idea and survival strategy. Also, the shots of it hiding in the bamboo are gorgeous. That poor tiger succumbs to the trickery and ends up as what I assume is a puppet created by crawly creatures. More on them in a bit. But because this documentary is so obscure, it's hard to find any references for this being the case. Of course, there is also a bit of stock footage involved here, which takes the tiger out of the forest and into grassland briefly. But it's barely noticeable, so it's okay. We also get one of the most harrowing and awesome lines after the tiger is dispatched here.
One less rival, one more meal.
The forest dragon then proceeds to cook its meal by breathing fire on it, which is a bit of a stretch, but given this whole story is about dragons coexisting in the fossil record, I'm willing to let it pass. This is also where humans are first introduced as a threat, which continue on to be the reason for the dragon's demise later on. Honourable mention here is the unseen desert dragon, which is listed on the dragon family tree during a few short montages, but is never shown. Obviously it was only put in the graphics to illustrate there being more species than we see in the show, but I still want to see it. And finally we have the mountain dragon, the iconic dragon design that European folklore depicts, with the crown of spikes on the head, which is something that the previous two also had, the stocky body and the 2 pairs of legs with the arrow-shaped tail. Very iconic. Something that is a bit off with this design though, is that it looks remarkably unsuited to the cold, but you can forget about this when you see it in action, particularly the mating ritual sequence, which is so beautiful to witness. And I love how it echoes the courtship behaviour of certain birds of prey in the modern day. There's also sexual dimorphism in this species, with the female being a pale dull green, and the male with a rusty red, which is particularly nice. This is also the only dragon species that gets a practical effect as well as CGI, as far as I'm aware, with the wonderful young female carcass, which is the catalyst for the narrative. Crawly Creatures worked on this, which is a testament to why it looks so good, seeing how they did most of Walking With, and later on Prehistoric Park, and the first 3 seasons of Primeval. What a golden age of shows. Like those shows, Framestore also worked on the CGI, which matches the creature movements and feel of the animals in the other shows. All looking so fluid and lifelike, and still holding up to this day. Tim Haynes was also the animation consultant for this. John Sibick designed the dragons, and Darren Hawley also worked on this as a digital paint artist. So many good names to add to this show's amazing potential. The practical effects also include various charred and frozen human corpses, which look really good for what they are, and help with the story, even if they're mainly in the background. Aside from Smaug from Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy, I would regard these dragons as being the best in any media. As well as the 4 dragons we get to see, we also get 2 other CGI creatures, which are the T-Rex and pterosaurs. The T-Rex design is an interesting one, looking a bit like a bulked up version of the Prehistoric Park ones, and still looking better than that awful, awful, awful Primeval one from Series 5. Ugh. It, like the tiger, meets quite a gruesome end to the hands, or rather wings or fiery breath, of the mother Prehistoric Dragon defending her young. The shots of it charred and dying afterwards are pretty graphic, but help illustrate how powerful these dragons are. Also the size of them. When fully grown, they're bigger than T-Rex, which begs the question of how they managed to eat enough to become that size. Something that the documentary doesn't really touch upon either. Oh well. Its roars are fairly generic, and there's definitely some bear noises in there as well, unfortunately. But to link it back to Prehistoric Park again, the T-Rex roars used in that show were first used for the mountain dragon, which is pretty cool. Also, the Prehistoric Dragon shares some of the sounds from Chased by Dinosaurs Therizinosaurus, which I always liked. It's haunting to hear that roar at any time, and especially from the Prehistoric Dragon. It feels very otherworldly. The pterosaurs, whilst never given a proper species name, look like Pteranodon, even though that species became extinct before T-Rex evolved, and presumably before the sequence is set. They're only really in one scene as well, and only ever glimpsed either in the background or swooping past, so it's hard to make out what they actually look like, or even what colours they have, which unfortunately doesn't give me much to talk about for them. I imagine that somewhere dark and deep in a vault or hard drive, there's the design sketches, marquettes and other bits of the show, which I hope one day will resurface. In addition to the creatures, there's also a CGI simulation of the KPG event, with an incredibly smooth-looking asteroid. Looks like a polished dinosaur egg. The filming locations for this show are also great. The Cretaceous sequence was filmed in the same place as the Chased by Dinosaurs episode Land of Giants, and the first series of Primeval, in La Palma, so you get to see a preview of the Permian before Primeval even existed. I wonder if Helen's there. It also reminds me of Chile, which was the filming location used for the Cretaceous in Walking with Dinosaurs, and subsequently Prehistoric Park. It's fittingly barren and desolate, even if we now know that the late Cretaceous Montana was more like the Everglades, but it fits with this documentary, so I'm not complaining. There's also shots from the bamboo forest for the Forest Dragon sequence, and the snowy mountains for the Mountain Dragon sequence, both of which I'm not sure where were actually filmed, but the locations are fittingly stunning either way. One of the more prominent filming locations is the Oxford Museum of Natural History, which I had the opportunity to visit back in 2022. The documentary brands it as a museum in London, which is fine for the story, I guess, and to anyone else outside of the UK, obviously all of England is just London. It's such a beautiful building, and to this day still hasn't really changed, with the T-Rex skeleton still standing where it is. I half expected to see Tanner accompanied by his theme when I was there. Sadly, he and the frozen carcasses of the dragons were absent, but that didn't spoil my enjoyment. Another thing which makes this documentary great is the amazing music, which has no right to be so good, yet is on par with Ben Bartlett's score for Walking With, Daniel Pemberton's score for Prehistoric Park, and Dominic Scherer's score for Primeval. It just has the gravitas and grandeur of those soundtracks, and I'm not even just talking about the brilliant and incredibly catchy guitar tune, but all the orchestral stuff with the choir too. It's just so well suited, and rightfully dramatic, to tell the story of the decline of the dragon family. Richard Blair Oliphant composed this beautiful music, and sadly it has never been released, aside from one track that was on his website a while ago. The best we have are audio extracts, which are fine, and I'm happy enough with those, but I'd really love if we get a proper release, something that I highly doubt will happen though. The sound design is great also, and I've talked a bit about the dragon roars already, but there's also the more stock sounds of bizarre forest animals, which are sounds which get repeated throughout other prehistoric shows, like Walking With, which I love listening to. With the narrative, we get it split up into two sides, as I mentioned. The story with Tanner and his other scientists who analyse and make discoveries on the dragon carcass, and the natural history and survival of dragon species over the years, which ultimately ties together and makes a really nicely rounded story. Ian Holm does a perfect job in doing the narration for the dragons, and he's got a great narration voice anyway, having done the narration for the UK release of Monsters We Met as well. Where's that DVD gone? I still need a copy. It's always great to hear Bilbo's voice talk about dragons, and it's fitting seeing how he does the exact same in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Tanner's actor, Paul Hilton, narrates his side of things, and while I agree that some of the acting in this is a bit off, it's not meant to be taken too seriously. But I have no idea what kind of accent he's trying. The actor is English, but for the most part in this, he's trying some weird American accent, which is very odd. Also, Jack Tanner's character looks and feels like a blend between Nick Cutter and Connor Temple, with Shrek shirt and prone to excited outbursts. In the American release, which is really watered down, Patrick Stewart does the narration, and Tanner's story is all but absent from it, so the ultimate outcome of the documentary is a far inferior product. It's just a shame that a lot of American releases of these shows seem to have a tendency to be pretty rubbish and a bit patronising with the rebranding of the names. Fortunately though, this did get multiple DVD releases, including a UK release, as it should have, unlike a few other documentaries I could think of which didn't for some reason. Anyway, I also got a companion book to go along with it, which is worth getting if you're into this show. The story for this show is very grand, but at the same time is also bleak, as it delivers a very clear extinction message all the way through, until the narration explicitly says it near the end, and I think it really works for how we treat species in the modern day. The continuing struggle of the mountain dragon family, with the mother trying to keep her daughter safe and ultimately losing the battle with the humans, who only think of her as a menace. It's always sad to see this idea of persecution of the species, from the humans who only want to protect their livestock, from the dragons who ultimately become extinct because of it. Quite a tragic tale, but superbly done. Overall, this is a great little thing. I still don't know what to call it. Is it a documentary? Is it a show? What is it? Anyway, it's really unique and interesting, and I always wished it had gotten a sequel, or at least some more recognition. But I'm happy to just watch this over and over. Still want to know what happened at the ending and the cliffhanger, though. I love putting this show in with all the other Framestore nature docs, and it having its own special place. Walking With essentially covered everything from the Paleozoic to the Holocene, more or less, with all the regular documentary styles, like a basic narrated documentary, one with a presenter, spin-offs with running a wildlife sanctuary, Prehistoric Park, and a drama series, Primeval, and an adaptation from literature, The Lost World. Dragons fits so nicely with all of this, and fits in as the speculative zoology side of things. I'd bundle them all up into a Framestore Prehistoric collection, which needs to be a thing, now that I think about it. So that's my review of Dragons. It's one of my favourite things to watch, and I hope the people watching this review feel the same way about it. One small request, could I please have a Prehistoric Dragon figure? I need that in my life. Thank you very much for getting through this. Please like, comment and subscribe.
Sorry.